So I want to introduce you to a woman that I've told stories about, but I don't know if I've ever told her biography before, but someday I will. She's one of my favorites. Her name is Amy Carmichael. And so you can see from the photo here that she lived from 1867 to 1951, and she was primarily a missionary during that time in India. Now, if you don't know your Indian history, India has something called a caste system. And so it's like the wealthiest are in this level, and it's just kind of like levels. And then there are the less wealthy and all the way down to the lowest level of the caste system. These are the poorest of the poor, the outcast, the unwanted. And because of their religious views, which is karma and reincarnation, they believe that if you're born into that caste system, you did something really, really bad in a previous life, and so you are now being punished by the gods and forced to live in this horrid, squalid conditions. Starvation, you deserve it because you were bad in a previous life. So they don't feel any need at all to reach out and serve because you deserve this. Reincarnation and karma is just giving you what you deserve. So part of what she encountered when she saw that was what would happen to the poorest of poor families when they would have too many children. They couldn't provide for them anymore. And so specifically little girls. Little girls in India that were in that lowest caste system were highly vulnerable because one of the practices that she encountered when she moved there was the practice of poor families selling their little girls to the temple to be temple prostitutes so they could make money off their daughters and sometimes their sons if they sold them to the Hindu priests to be prostitutes in the temple. And Amy Carmichael was heartbroken when she learned of this practice and saw these poor girls and some boys, like I said, this was their future, torture and rape for the rest of their life. And she just couldn't take it. And so she began to pray and say, God, what would you have me do? By the way, that is really a powerful prayer. When your heart is broken by some need in this world and you begin to say that prayer, you are really at the doorstep to really having an adventure with God. And it was no different with Amy. She began to pray that prayer and God said, all right, you're serious about that? And then here's what you can do. And a short time after she started praying that, a woman knocked at her door one day and she had a little 7-year-old girl with her named Preena. And the woman walked in and said to Amy, this is Preena. Her mom is so poor that she sold her as a slave. And she was 7, so she'd already been a slave for a while by this time, a sex slave, a prostitute at the local temple. And she ran away once, and I found her and I brought her back to her mom, and her mom turned her right over to the priests, and they were so angry with her, they burned her hands black as punishment for running away from them. And she said, I just found her again. She ran away again. She said, I know you're here to help us, Amy. Can you do anything? And at that moment, Amy said, Preena, who had just been standing there, and Amy was sitting down when this woman was telling the story, Preena walked over, crawled up into Amy's lap, and looked at her and said, Alma, which in their language means mommy. Amy said, in that moment, I fell in love with this little girl and said, I will take her. I don't care what it costs me, I will take her. And that began a brand new ministry for her of rescuing little girls and then boys from this life of temple prostitution. And eventually she started an orphanage, and then she started a school for girls and a school for boys and a clinic for the poorest of the poor, the caste that were untouchables. She began to touch and love and serve. And her dramatic love just led to so many experiences with God. I mean, her life was characterized by supernatural experience after supernatural experience after supernatural experience, and this is really critical. Because I tell stories. If you listen to my teaching at all, you'll hear me tell stories of George Mueller and Hudson Taylor and people like Amy Carmichael who have these incredible adventures with God, and their lives are not natural, they are supernatural. They experience God's supernatural power obliterating obstacles and God's supernatural guidance and His supernatural provision. That's what they experience. It's not natural, it is supernatural. That's what they experience with God. And I think there's a growing cynicism in American Christianity. It's like, well, yeah, man, that happened, in the pages of the Bible. You read about the disciples, and they had supernatural experiences because Jesus was there, but now He's not here, and there's just nothing for us. And I tell you the stories of people like Amy and George Mueller and Hudson Taylor because they lived as contemporaries not that long ago, and they had the exact same experiences. And what I believe is that God, what He did for them, He will do for you and me. We don't have to settle for the natural. So I wanted to show you this, and I apologize right away for my Photoshop inability. I'm not very good at this, as you can see. But I want you to look at this little gauge. And I want to ask you, for those of you who say that you follow Jesus, when was the last time that arrow moved off of the natural and into the supernatural? When was the last time you experienced God doing something in your life that could never be attributed to human effort? When was the last time you saw him obliterate an obstacle or change a human heart or provide supernaturally for a need you could not provide for? When was the last time you experienced God at work in your life, experienced his overwhelming love for you? And if you can't think of a time and that needle just stays on natural, what if you're not really following Jesus? Some of you are skeptical about that sentence because you're like, no, this is just how it is. And hold that thought for those of you who are skeptical, because I'm going to show you a verse later in our teaching today that will directly from the mouth of Jesus challenge that thought that, oh, it's just really about the natural. I don't believe that. I believe that what he did through these people, these heroes of my faith that I talk about all the time, he is willing to do in my life and your life. And what if he shows up supernaturally? You have people in your life right now that you really, really want to see God work in their heart and change their life because they're on a path that's destructive for them, right? You have that. We all do. What if he brought his supernatural power into their life and began to change them? What would that mean to you? And you have needs in your life that are serious and significant. You have things you're worried about and anxious about. And what if his supernatural power was aimed at those areas? And how much would that mean to you? So we're finishing today a series called Great Expectations, and I told you when I started this a couple months ago, I said, I want to show you that you can expect great things from God. I want to show you how to expect it so that in your relationship with him, you can experience great things with God. That's what I want. And so I want to show you today how to take steps toward the supernatural life. So I want to ask you to open up your program, take out the notes you'll find inside, grab a pen. Welcome to those of you who joined us online, especially at our website, penuelchurchlife.com. We're glad you're there. I want to ask you you can see these notes right next to the video, so if you don't mind grabbing them, filling them out, there are some things that we're definitely going to want to talk about today as we learn how to take steps towards this supernatural relationship with God. So the very first thing, and the place where it all begins, is this. You have to remember that God responds to any level of faith. That's what I want you to start with. Remember that God responds to any level of faith. While you're writing that down, let me tell you the reason I did this series. My habit is that my alarm clock goes off a half hour earlier than I need it to, so that I can get up and I can sit down and I have a cup of coffee and I have my Bible, my prayer notebook, and I just sit there and I read my Bible and then I pray and I spend time alone with God at the beginning of almost every day. This is my habit. So I love this habit. And in December, I was sitting there with my Bible, and I was reading in the book of Matthew. And Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those 4 books of the New Testament detail the life of Jesus. If you haven't read them in a while, I highly encourage you to read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I was reading through Matthew, and I read a story, and then another story, and then another story, and they were right almost directly in a row, and I was so struck by them that I grabbed my notebook and I started writing and writing and writing. I filled 2 pages in my notebook with observations, and as I was reading about it, I'm like, I need to do a series. I need to call it Great Expectations. I need to show people that they can expect great things from God, and these are the stories that I read in December. The first one is this one, Matthew chapter 8, the Roman Centurion. So if you know your Bible, you know the story of this one. There was a centurion who came to Jesus one day, and he said that he had a servant that he really cared about, and the servant had been paralyzed. We don't know how, but he was in terrible pain, and he was paralyzed, and he said to Jesus, listen, I'm asking you to heal my servant. And Jesus said, okay, and he started to come with him, and the centurion said, no, wait. You don't have to come with me. Just give the word, and it'll be done from here. And the centurion said, I know this is true. And I love what he said. He said, I'm a man because I'm a man of authority. If I tell that soldier to go, he goes. If I tell that soldier to come, he comes. He responds to my authority. And he said, you have authority. And all you need to do is, with the authority you have, say that my servant will be healed, and he'll be healed at this moment from a distance. And Jesus was like, whoa, do you know this is the only place in the Bible that I'm aware of where Jesus was amazed at someone in a positive way? He was amazed at the Roman centurion's faith. He said to the crowd, he's like, I haven't found faith like this in all of Israel. And he said to the Roman centurion these words. He said, go back home, and look at this. Because you believed, it has happened. Why had it happened? Because he believed. Those words really struck me. So I was writing about those in my notebook, and then I kept reading in Matthew, and I read this story of the woman who was bleeding just a few verses later. This woman had a bleeding condition. She had been bleeding for 12 years. Nothing could stop it. Now, in Israel's society, if you had a bleeding condition, you were unclean ceremonially. You couldn't participate in worship services. You had to stay away from people. So not only was it physically overwhelming to her, it was spiritually isolating for her. And all of a sudden, she heard about Jesus, what he was doing. She's like, oh my goodness, this guy can heal me. And so she got it in her mind, if I could just touch the hem of his robe, I would be healed. And so she found where Jesus was. She got through the crowd, and she got up to Jesus, and she touched the hem of the robe, and Jesus felt power go out from him, and he stopped the crowd. He turned around to the woman, and he said to her this. He said, daughter, be encouraged. Your faith has made you well. And the woman was healed at that moment. Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, my power has made you well, although that's what did it. He said, what made her well? Her faith. And I'm like, oh, here's another one, right after this Roman Centurion. Because you believed, you got it. And your faith has made you well. Okay, wow, that's amazing. And then, wasn't done reading, the very next story that's tied right to this one. There was a synagogue leader who came to Jesus and said, my daughter just died. But if you'll come with me and put your hand on her, you can bring her back from the dead. And Jesus said, okay. And he went to the home of the synagogue leader, and there were all these people in there crying and grieving, and that's how they did it in that day. And it was just like this huge, they were professional mourners. They did it for a job, and so they were there, and they were mourning and grieving, and Jesus said, she's not dead, she's sleeping, because to Jesus, death and sleep, about the same thing. His power is so great. And they laughed at him. He said, out you go, out, all of you out. You don't believe this anyway, out. And then he walked in, and it says this, he went in and took the girl by the hand, and she stood up. The faith of the dad, the faith of the centurion, the faith of the woman, all of them led to dramatic encounters with God. All of them. Their faith allowed them to experience God. And so then I started thinking, as I was writing about all these things, they struck me so much, I just kept reading the stories again and again and again, trying to see what else I could notice. And I noticed something else, and I started thinking, what did each of them have to believe in order to experience God? And so I started thinking about that Roman centurion. So what did the Roman centurion have to believe about Jesus the moment he went to him to ask for healing? He had to believe that Jesus was so powerful that he could fuse back together spinal injuries, right? Paralyzed, in terrible pain, that he could fuse them back together and take all the swelling down, all the breakage down, heal it all, and so powerful he could even do it from a distance. He had to believe that. Now, had he ever seen that? Of course not. He'd seen power, though. He knew what it meant to have authority to tell someone to go and do something and it would happen. And he believed that Jesus had authority over even injuries. And then I thought, well, what did the woman with the bleeding condition have to believe? Well, she had to believe that Jesus was so powerful that power just kind of flowed out of him, even into his clothing. Now, I've had powerful clothing before, but it's powerfully smelly. Because I was out in the sun and working, and I was like, whoo, Brian, your clothes are powerful. Go change. Right? I've never had this power, though. So much power in Jesus that even his clothes had the power. And so she just believed, if I could touch the hem of his robe, his power will heal me. And what did the dad have to believe? I mean, the most amazing belief of all, right? He had to believe that Jesus Christ had power over death. That Jesus Christ was even in control of death. So let me tell you this. Do you remember how old you were when you first turned on a light switch? Do you remember that? I can't remember. Since as young as I can remember being able to turn on a light switch or turn off a light switch. We don't have an Olympic sport called light switch flipping. You know why? Because everyone can do it. Not hard. You can go over to the light switch, flip it on, flip it off. You have that power, right? We take it for granted we can just do it. Jesus didn't just have power over light switches, although they didn't exist at that day. He had power over death and life. He could flip on a human body like you and I flip on a light switch. That's how powerful he was. He could go up to a dead person. You ever been by an open casket? Their body is turned off. Their heart is off. Their brain is off. Their circulatory system is off. He is so powerful with just a word, a touch. He can flip that body back on. And the Jewish synagogue leader had to believe this, that he could turn back on someone who was off. And I thought, each of them had a different expectation, right? The Roman Centurion expected him just to say a word and it would be healed from a distance. The woman expected to touch his garment and she'd be healed. The father believed that if he touched his daughter, she would come back from the dead. He would turn on her dead body. All of them had different expectations. They all got to experience God. And I started journaling and I said this in my notes. God appears to respond to our expectations wherever they are. Could Jesus have healed all of them from a distance? Yes. Could he have healed all of them with a touch? Yes. But he responded to their expectations. Whatever they were expecting, that's what they experienced. So then I'm like, well, is that what the Bible teaches in other places? Well, you decide. Look at this verse. It says, then Jesus was talking to two blind men. He said, according to your faith, let it be done to you. So in other words, whatever you believe, that's what you're about to experience. So again, he was responding to whatever they expected. They expected him to heal them. And their faith led to their healing. Well, how about this verse? He went into a community where they all knew him, and it says he didn't do many miracles there because of their what? Their lack of faith. So in other words, he simply responded to the faith and expectations of the people that he was around. If that's true, and I believe it's true, then number two becomes essential. Take a look at this. For you to move that needle off of natural onto supernatural, you have to answer this question. What do I expect God to do in my life? What do you expect him to do in your life? Some of you, the default question in your mind right now is nothing. That is the honest answer. You don't expect him to do anything. Maybe you think you don't deserve it. Maybe you think he just doesn't care about your needs. Maybe you think, whatever. You default to nothing. You think that needle is pegged on natural and it's not going to move for you for whatever reason you've filled out in your mind. The sad thing about this is, the truth is, 2,000 years ago when Jesus was doing all this for these three people, there were moms and dads whose children died at that time when Jesus was right there, and they didn't come back from the dead. He didn't turn their bodies back on. There were people who had loved ones who were sick or paralyzed, and they weren't healed. And there were people who were sick themselves, and they weren't healed. And the reason is, they never went to Jesus at all. They never believed. They didn't believe that he could do it. Oh, there's all those people getting caught up in this Jesus hysteria. There's nothing to it. They didn't believe he could do it, or they didn't believe he would. Well, he won't care about me enough to do it. I don't matter enough to him. But there are two fundamental truths that you have to accept for you to begin to move that needle. The first truth is this, or to see that needle move. The first truth is this: you have to believe that God is always at work in my life. You have to believe that God is working right now in your life on your behalf. He is, the Bible makes it very clear, he is for you, not against you. He is for you, not against you. Like every loving mom or dad is for their children, not against them. God puts us in this role, this relationship where he is for us as a loving father, not against us. And the Bible says this, Jesus said, my Father's always at his work to this very day, and I too am working. It's true here in America right now that God is working at work right now, and he's at work in your life and mine, and he's working for you, not against you, because he loves you like crazy. He loves you beyond words can ever explain while you're here on earth. And then the second truth you have to believe is I get his involvement when I demonstrate faith. Any point in which you demonstrate faith, that's when you get to see God. It won't happen without faith. You have to take some step of faith. So this really struck me as I was thinking about it. Well, actually, let me show you this verse first. I told you just a moment ago, Jesus once had two blind men who came to him asking for healing. And the story is interesting. It happens literally right after that story of Jesus bringing that girl back from the dead. He goes out of the house, and there are two blind men who have followed Jesus somehow in their blindness. They found out where he was, and they call out to him, Jesus, please give us back our sight. And Jesus doesn't do anything. He leaves with his group, and they follow him. Imagine how hard it is to follow him in the darkness, blind, following Jesus. They keep following and calling out, please heal us, please heal us. And he goes into a home where he's staying, and they go into the home. They're feeling their way in, and they're like, Jesus, please give us back our sight. And that's when he asks them a question. He doesn't say yes. He doesn't heal them like he's done for other people. Instead, he asks them a question. Do you believe that I am able to do this? It's the first question. Do you believe it? Do you believe in your life today that God is able to move that needle in your life? Do you believe it? Do you believe that God wants to do that for you? That he wants you to experience his love? That he wants you to experience his guidance, that he wants you to experience his power? Do you believe that he is able to do more, immeasurably more than you can ask or imagine? Do you believe it? You got to sort that out. I believe it. To the core of who I am, I believe that he wants to do it. And at the level of your faith and expectation, that's where you will start to experience God. So let me go back to George Mueller. I told a story once about George Mueller near the end of his life. He literally, for those of you who haven't heard me talk about him before, he literally cared for thousands and thousands of orphans in Bristol, England in the 1800s and the early 1900s. And he did it all just by bringing his needs to God and saying, God, I need this. I'm doing what you want. And again, once you know what the will of God is, I'm doing what you want, God, so you're going to take care of it. Here's the promise you've made. Thank you that you're going to provide. And God gave him millions and millions in his lifetime to care for orphans without ever asking a human. Because God can move people's hearts and minds. That's not hard for God. You know, like we can move that light switch. He can move a human heart. So near the end of his life, he was given this opportunity to go speak in Canada. He prayed and said, God, do you want me to do it? I'll say yes or no. And as he prayed and prayed, he knew that God wanted him to do it. So he said yes. Once he knew, then he knew that any obstacle he encountered was God's to take care of. So he got on a boat, sailed across the ocean, and then encountered this tremendous fog. It was so dense, the ship captain couldn't move forward. Too dangerous. So George Mueller came to see the captain and said, I have an appointment at this time in Quebec. I got to get there. And the captain said, sorry, we're not moving. Have you not looked at the fog outside? You see how dense this is? And George Mueller responded to him and said, no, my eye is not on the density of the fog, but on the living God who controls every circumstance of my life. So let's go down into the chart room and pray. And so the captain said, okay. And he followed him down, literally thinking, what kind of lunatic is this? He's going to pray that God takes the fog away from the ocean? Sure. Because all he was used to was the natural life. That's all you get, right? That's what God's life, that's what it's about, just natural life. Certainly God couldn't do anything about fog on the ocean. And so he said they got into the chart room and George Mueller got down on his knees and he just prayed a very simple prayer for God to lift the fog. And then he said amen. It was short, sweet, right to the point, like a child would pray it. Childlike faith. And the captain thought, well, I should say something too. And George Mueller put his hand on his shoulder and said, no, don't pray. And the guy's like, why? And George Mueller said, well, two reasons. First off, he said, you don't actually believe that God will. You don't actually believe that God will do this. So don't bother. Because he's going to match the level of your faith, remember? Whatever you believe, that's what you're going to see. And then he said, and the second reason is because I believe God already has done it. So there's no need for you to pray for it. He said, Captain, I've known my God for 57 years, and there's never been a single day in my life that I've failed to gain an audience with a king. So get up, open the door, and you'll find the fog lifting. So the captain went upstairs, opened the door, and the fog was dissipating, gone. And they arrived on time, and all of a sudden, this ship captain became a real follower of Jesus who experienced the needle moving. God will respond to whatever level of faith you have. Do you expect him to do anything in your life? Some of you don't pray because you don't actually expect him to do anything anyway. So you don't pray and you don't see anything. So the key question then becomes, well, if this is all true, and according to my faith it'll be, then I have to learn how to grow my faith, which is question number 3, how do I build my faith? That becomes like the most important question. How do you build your faith? If it's about faith from beginning to end, and he'll respond to my faith, then the question is, how do I build my faith? And the answer to that is a story I told week 2, I think, of this whole series, way back at the beginning. This is how God works. Once you start getting serious about following him, he will put things together in your life like a puzzle. So I read in December about these 3 stories. I'm like, that's cool. I want to do a series about expecting great things from God. And then I read these verses here in Luke. And it filled in a puzzle piece that I have not understood maybe my whole life. Luke 17, these are some of the most important verses I'm aware of in the Bible. Look what they start with. The disciples came to Jesus and said, show us how to make our faith greater. Please show us how to increase our faith. Because they're watching all this happen. The disciples are watching this little girl being brought back from the dead. They're like, oh my goodness, they're watching the Roman Centurion servant healed from a distance without ever Jesus even having to be there. They're watching this woman's bleeding condition gone. They're watching all of these miracles and they're going, okay, we want more faith. Show us how to have more faith. And Jesus is so pleased with the request that he says to them, he doesn't actually answer the question. He tells them what will happen if their faith grows. He says, if you had faith like a grain of mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it would obey you. Now, are mulberry trees jumping into the sea natural or supernatural? Which way are you going on that one? Pretty obvious, right? They are supernatural. Jesus Christ, no doubt about it, is saying you can experience the supernatural if your faith grows at all. And again, a little bit, just mustard seed faith, just a tiny little speck of faith. You raise that faith up at all, you will experience supernatural things. So don't say, you may choose to say, my needle never moves. I have lived a natural life, no examples of supernatural. That's your choice, though. It is not what Jesus is offering. You can choose to live that life, but that's not what he's offering. So he's like, yeah, this is the right question, folks. This is it. You should be asking, how can I make my faith grow? And then he's like, and here's the answer. And he tells this crazy story that for the first 100 times I read it, I didn't actually like it because I didn't understand it. And now I understand it. He said to his disciples, okay, you want to know how to grow your faith? He said, suppose one of you has a servant plowing or looking after the sheep. Will he say to the servant when he comes in from the field, come along now and sit down to eat? Is that what he says? So you hire a servant, and they say, your job is to take care of my needs. So go out today, and I want you to take care of the crops in this field. I want you to take care of my farm animals. And they work all day in the hot sun. They're exhausted and sweaty and disgusted. They come at the end of the day. It's evening. It's dinner time. They walk in. Does the master say, oh, you look tired. Why don't you come and sit down, and I'll feed you? Is that what he said? No. Everybody knew the answer was no. Won't the master say, prepare my supper, get yourself ready, which it means like clean up, please, because you kind of stink a little bit, and then wait on me while I eat and drink, and after that you may eat and drink. Isn't that what he's going to say? The answer is yes. And then he says this, and will he thank the servant because he did what he was told to do? And the answer again is no. They all understood this. You paid him. It's his job. He agreed to this before he said yes. He's the master. He defines what's done, and you accept the pay, so you do it. So Jesus says, this is how you grow your faith? Like, what? And then he brings it all home with one sentence, and he says this, in the same way, when you obey me, you should say, we are unworthy servants who have simply done our duty. So he says, this is how you grow your faith. You make yourself the servant in that story, and Jesus is the master. And notice there's an assumption in that verse. Did you catch it? Do you see what the assumption is? Underline it on your notes if you see it. Because here it is. Look at this. When you obey me. Isn't that an assumption? He's assuming that we care about obeying him. He's assuming not only that we care about it, but we will do it. In other words, as servants of Jesus, the only thing we care about is whatever he wants done, and that's what we do. It's his will, not ours. His will, not ours. And when we've obeyed him, then we will just say, hey, we're just your servants. We're just doing what you ask us to do. And he said, and that's how you grow your faith. You transform your life so that all you are is his servant doing his will while you're here on earth. It's his will. And all that matters is that I line up my will with his. That's it. Because I'm his servant. He's the master. Whatever he asks of me, that's what I do. He says that's the key to making your faith grow. It is, in a sentence, a tenacious commitment to doing the will of God. And that is how your faith grows. And so in the middle of all this, as I was learning all of this back in December, and then in January, I started reading again one of my favorite heroes' biographies, Frank Laubach, this man who had amazing adventures with God, tremendous impact in this world. And his whole life changed spiritually from boredom and tedious Christianity like we all experience, like, who cares, go to a church service once in a while, to this transformed relationship, dynamic relationship with God where he was like constantly amazed at what God was doing. And it all began with a decision he made to line up every moment of his life under the will of God. He made a goal years and years ago that every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes, he was going to turn and he was going to bring his will back under the will of Jesus. And he was going to pray and say these words to him. He's going to say, Father, I'm your servant. Is there anything you want me to say or do for you right now in this moment? And all of a sudden, as I was reading all of these things, it just went click, 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 and I got it. I got it. I know how to build my faith now. And 2 months ago, I started that prayer. 2 months ago, I made that prayer my every half-hour goal. Every 15 minutes to 30 minutes, I try and pull away from whatever I'm doing and say those words to him. I say, Father, I'm your servant in this world. That's all I am. I make myself your servant. Your will is all that matters. So if there anything you want me to say right now for you, anything you want me to do for you right now, and I don't have to close my eyes to pray the prayer. I can be on a Zoom call and praying that prayer for the person I'm talking to. Do you want me to encourage them? Do you want me to say something nice to them? Is there something they need from me right now? I'm your servant. You show me, and the answer is yes. And so many times I pray those words and I don't mean them because it's just ritual. And so many times I pray those words and I mean them with all my heart. I'm getting a lot better at that over the time, 2 months now. And so many times I pray those words and I have no prompting at all from God. No sense that there's anything he wants me to obey in that moment. And so many times somebody's face or name pops into my mind and I know that I'm supposed to write them or call them or encourage them in some way or give them something. I know that he wants me to move in that situation. And then my only responsibility as the servant is to do whatever the master says. And so then I try and obey. And there have been so many adventures with God in the last 2 months. I can't tell you all the stories of what God is doing in my life in the last 2 months yet, but there will come a day when I can. I have had incredible moments with God where I just have felt so overwhelmed with love for him that I have to worship him in my house because I work at home all the time. I've had times where I just can't stop reading my Bible because there's so many things that I keep seeing where it's just like he's speaking to me again and again and again through this book. It's so dynamic and living. I've had times where I've just sensed in my prayers that he is so close to me. I've seen him do what Frank Laubach talked about and what my heroes of the faith talk about, where my only job is to do this, line up my will with his, and then he does all the work. Jesus literally said, my burden is easy, my yoke is light, so come follow me. And he means it. He will do the work when we are serious about doing his will. You get him and his activity in your life. Do you want that? And that's how your faith grows. Your faith grows when the will of God becomes your only focus and you're simply responding to whatever he wants you to do in that moment. What would you like said and what would you like done? I can say those words with such passion now after 2 months. And I want that for you. I want you to watch that needle move. I want you to see that needle move from natural to supernatural. So I know that I'm speaking to 3 different groups of people who are listening to me today. Some of you are very skeptical about this whole thing. And if I were to ask you why you're skeptical, the number one reason I hear why people are skeptical is because, hey, I tried that prayer thing and it didn't work. I prayed about this. I prayed about that job. I didn't get it. I prayed about that relationship. It didn't happen. I prayed about this. This need, and he never came through for me. And I want you to know the promise in the New Testament isn't that whatever you pray for, God will just do. He's not a cosmic vending machine just waiting for you to pull the handles and off it comes and here you go, whatever you want. It is always a conditional promise in the New Testament. And some of you are disappointed with God, and wrongly so, because he never promised what you claim. He promised this. Take a look at this verse. 1 John 5:14, this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will. In other words, it's only when this is right. So, okay, I know you want this, Father. That's how George Mueller saw the fog dissipate. He prayed and said, God, do you want me to say yes to this invitation to Canada or no? And he was convinced that God wanted him to say yes. Now, once you're doing what God wants you to do, any obstacle you encounter is God's to obliterate, not yours. That's what George Mueller learned. That's how God gave him millions and millions and millions of dollars in answer to prayer, only by asking God, never by asking a human being, because once you know what God wants and you're doing that, then every obstacle you encounter is his to obliterate. That's how that happens. That's when the needle really starts moving. And it only happens when you do what Jesus said. You make yourself his servant, and he's the master, and all that matters is obeying his will in this world. That's it. Some of you are so disappointed with your Christianity, so disappointed with God because he hasn't come through like you think he should. He hasn't done what you told him to do. And I am so, so sorry to say this to you, but he never said that's how it works. Never. It doesn't work with you telling God your will and then he just follows along and goes, oh, well, of course, whatever you want. That is never the promise. The promise is you make his will your focus and then you get God. And if you won't do this, you just continue to pursue your will in this world and your will in this world, and you get ready for a whole lot of disappointment and emptiness in your religion. And a whole lot of unanswered prayers, because that's not the promise. Some of you are, truthfully, you're not done with this. You have your plan. And the most dangerous thing I see in America is success in the American dream. That is really dangerous to our Christian faith. Happens all the time. I've seen so many Christians walk away from God. People who used to go to church, used to be serious about giving and growing, now they don't even think about him. Or little thought to God. No pursuit of him, no serving. This relationship doesn't matter at all because now they have money and they're successful and they have comfort and it's okay, great. And that's become their little God. But they can't tell you of God showing up in their life and doing that, making that needle move. No matter what, the goal in the relationship is that we bring our will under his will. We're serious about this. And that's when you get to experience God. Some of you, you're still going this way, doing whatever you want to do. God will let you go down that path, but you won't experience him until you bring yourself to the end and you surrender to his will. That's how this has to change. And the truth is, I also know some of you, you're tired. You are tired of not seeing God at work in your life. You are tired of all the problems, tired of all the anxiety, tired of all the worries, tired of all the things. And it's like, enough. You've reached the end of yourself. Finally. Now you get to experience God. You bring your will to his and say, God, from this day forward, I'm your servant. I'm tired. I'm just tired of this. Your will be done, not mine. I give it up. Show me your will, and I'm serious about doing it from this day forward. And then make it your goal. Every 15 minutes to 30 minutes, do that. Pull away. Say, Father, I'm here. I'm your servant. Is there anything you want me to say right now for you? Anything you want me to do right now for you? And you can get to the point where you can say that while you're having a conversation with someone, while you're on a Zoom call with someone, while you're in the grocery store, while you're driving down the road. You can just make yourself available to him. It's always about your will, Father. I am your servant. You are the master. Whatever you want, I will obey. And that's when the needle really starts to move. Your will, your will, your will. Now, some of you are just here watching or exploring your faith with us, and I'm really glad you heard this because most people get this idea that Christianity is about a church service once in a while or a religious service or a religious experience you have to go through. You got to get baptized, you got to get confirmed, you got to jump through this little hoop like a trained puppy. Whoop, 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 there we go, that's what it's about. All right, I've done that hoop jump, now it's all over, now it's whatever I want. And you've been misled. It is about a dynamic relationship with a real God who has unbelievable, unstoppable power, and that's what it's about. And this God is so in love with you that 2,000 years ago he gave his son to die in this world. Jesus Christ came into the world to give his life on the cross for all the unloving things we have said and done so that the first issue in our life can be addressed. We are on a ship that's sinking and he came up with his boat and said, hey, if you'll let me, I'll save you. I'll save you. And any human being who turns to Jesus gets him. Let me have you bow your heads. Maybe this is the next step for you spiritually, is to let Jesus Christ give you this gift of rescue. We tend to downplay the unloving things we've said and done in this world, but they are serious to God. So serious that he sent his son to die for us. And Jesus gave his life on a cross for us. But if you will just turn to him, he will hear you and rescue you and begin a relationship with him. And if you want this with your head bowed, you can say, Jesus, I'm turning to you today. Please forgive me. I have been unloving in my time on earth. Please forgive me. Today, I want a real relationship with you. Come make your home inside of me. With the faith I have, I'm turning to you. Be a part of my life today. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we finish, can you grab your little connection card out of your program? Even if you're a regular tender, you can just take a moment and give us your name on that first line. But if you made a decision today, check the box. Let us know about that. If you want us to pray about something, we have a team of people that will pray for you. And same with those of you who are watching online. Go to our website at penuelchurchlife.com, and there's a little Get Connected tab. And check that box, or click on that box, and then let us know about any decisions or things you want us to pray about, and we'll pray for you as a church. All right, thanks so much for coming. Hope to see you again next week.